Today's Patreon shoutout is for Ye Old Knight. Ratadrabik versus Sivitri, Trostani and Juri. Got mana there, hopefully a means of drawing cards with the Morbid Curiosity, so we'll try keeping that. Draw into a Verdant Catacombs on turn 1, so we'll get out a tap land. A Witch's Cauldron for Juri. Sivitri just holding up Dimir mana. And we get into another fetch land, so that can probably just be a plains for us. Get down another duel into a Talisman of Hierarchy. First commander that comes down is Juri, Master of the Review. Trostani throws out a tap land and Ovia Pashiri. Mana still being held up by the Dimir player, so gonna see if I can land a Mangara here. And that will act as a decent blocker for a good few turns. Just drew in 2 Necropotents, so not going to be too worried if my opponent counters the Mangara. The Rakdos player throwing out a Goblin Assault. Sylvan Ranger from the Celestia player. And then after that deciding to swing in with Pashiri towards the Rakdos player. And Sivitri now getting down a Defiler of Flesh. Noteworthy that there is a Gyreet Sanitarium here as well. And yeah, just noticing that we do have an Urborg as well, so not going to be too worried about drawing into the Cabal Coffers in this deck. Do need to stop drawing into lands though, it's a Windswept Heath. Alright, so do we just get down our commander here? It doesn't seem as though anyone's really looking to wipe the board, so I think getting down the Ratadrabik is fine here, and we can play out a tapped shock land from one of the fetches. We'll do it with the Bloodstained Maya because the other two can get basic plains for us. And it's noteworthy that we can also tap down the fetches for black mana now thanks to the Urborg, but don't want to draw into a Godless Shrine and be forced to shock it in. And now before combat, the Rakdos player plays out Mahadi Emporium Master, followed by one of the fetches, Riveteer's Overlook. So that being sacrificed straight away puts a plus counter on the commander, as well as fetching out a land of course. And they did get a Goblin token that has to attack at the beginning of the upkeep. So the 1/1 Goblin swings in towards Trostani. They might let this survive because it does mean less treasure tokens from the Mahadi. Also they'll keep their creature for a more decent blocker. And just missing one commander now, Trostani, Celestia's Voice being cast by the Celestia player. And there we see Yahenni's Expertise, so we're going to lose our commander now unfortunately. And yeah, thought we were pretty safe from a board wipe, but apparently not. They managed to dodge the board wipe thanks to the 4 toughness on their own creature. And they're going to get in an Ashiok Dream Render, unfortunately, so it's a good job the Urborg's in play. We won't be able to search our library for cracking the fetches. Our commander can go back into the command zone. We'll at least keep the Mangara in play here. And that's the second spell they've cast this turn, so Mangara is going to draw us a card. And the damage from Juri goes straight onto the face of the Sivitri. Can't go onto the Ashiok, unfortunately. Gets us into yet another land, Phyrexian Tower. It is a sack outlet at least. And then our opponent targets himself with the mill and exiles all our graveyards. So in the bin now are 3 lands and Animate Dead, and obviously the Expertise as well. Guarantee I'm going to forget about the static ability on this thing, not allowing us to search. Wow, what's that? Is that like 5 lands that we've had on top of our library? Concealed Courtyard this time. So we'll get down the sack outlet where we can. And yeah, I was just going to go Crowded Crypt into Necropotents here, but maybe it's just our commander again. I'm not going to be blocking this thing even if it does swing in, so I'm just going to deal a bit of damage to the Rakdos player. We'll go back up to 40, send them down to 38. Hoarding Ogre from the Rakdos player. And then the 1/1 has to swing in, so the Goblin's going to die either way here. Okay, but Trostani decided to let them keep it, taking the 1 damage. So this is definitely sack fodder for them. Celestia Signet. And then Trostani casting Angelic Accord, so we'll draw another card to the Mangara. It's the most work Mangara's ever done for me this game. And finally, drawing into a non-land, that is Veto, Thorn of the Dusk Rose. Sivitri throwing away a Hagra Mauling by playing in the Brood Pit tapped. Then another Planeswalker into play is the commander this time, Sivitri. And they decide to activate the +1 on that, and still deciding to hold back the 4/4 Menace. And it's another land for us. I think Veto's the only non-land we've drawn into so far. We'll continue to set up the Field of the Dead by having as many different lands in as possible. Then it can be Crowded Crypt. We've held off on that for long enough. Would have had a counter on that with Ratadrabik dying, but I don't think it really matters particularly. So play out Veto, Thorn of the Dusk Rose, and don't think we're going to be gaining any life from the Mangara. Suppose we could swing in towards Trostani and just have them chump block. Does encourage our opponent to swing this thing in at us, but they'd be able to swing this through to Trostani either way, so yeah, we might as well gain some life and start triggering veto. I want to show the Rakdos player that we're not solely looking at him as well. And Trostani, worried about losing the commander to Death Touch or something like that, decides to take the hit. Veto, we are definitely pointing at the Dimir player. They lose 2 life to our 2 life gained by the lifelink on Mangara. Juri into play now, first casting a Chromatic Sphere. Obviously 2 hasty goblins in play at the moment. And okay, swinging in the Ogre towards Trostani regardless, even though that can block. The Goblin swings in towards Ashiok. I dare say they're going to try and go wide and deal some damage to Ashiok. Making 2 treasure tokens with the Ogre. The Goblins, yeah, they're just going wide on Trostani instead. I mean, they probably keep the Goblins this way. That's probably what they're thinking. Trostani should be blocking the Ogre. Again, letting the damage through, so Trostani very much looking to gain a bunch of life and not worry about these little hits that are taking place. Playing it very cagey, not wanting to block with that 5 toughness. Cracking 2 treasures puts 2+ counters on the Juri and allows our opponent into Shrine of the Burning Rage. Don't know if I covered actually, but we do have an Unburial Rites in hand as well, which isn't necessarily going to be as useful with Ashiok in play, but we assume that this is going to go down at some point. Trostani playing the first token in Advent of the Worm. So jumping up by 5 life by getting down a 5/5 token with Trample, and that will trigger the Angelic Accord at the end of this turn. They'll get a 4/4 Angel, so already going north of their starting life total. Cycling a Secluded Step as well. Over to the Dimir player now and plussing on the Sivitri again. Okay, and we see another board wipe here in a Crux of Fate, destroying all non-dragon creatures. So really trying hard to protect the Planeswalkers. Luckily for us, that triggers our Crowded Crypt and the Ratadrabik. Yeah, they can't activate the Ashiok at instant speed. We could try keeping our commander in the bin here for the Unburial Rites, and if they exile our graveyards, then it'll end up back in the command zone anyway. And Juri was at 3 power, I think, there, so can deal damage to the Ashiok, and we'll be able to get rid of that with our 2/2s next turn, because they won't have Summoning Sickness, of course. So yeah, knocking Ashiok down to 1. Okay, and we see Urborg anyway, so they can exile our graveyard, so Ratadrabik going to end up in the command zone. They could have minus down the Ashiok to do that anyway, so we did plan for that. Allows us to keep the Unburial Rites in hand at least. So we draw into a land again. I mean, I suppose it's just as well if we're going to keep having to recast our commander. So we'll deal 2 damage to the Ashiok and 2 damage to Sivitri. And we'll have to pay 4 life into this, but we're about to gain 2 from the Mangara anyway. So managing to send down the Ashiok and the Veto, we are going to continue to point over at the Dimir player. And I'm not confident that there's too much point in playing out our commander straight away here. Maybe Necropotence to actually try and get into something relevant apart from lands is going to be a good idea. So let's throw out the Necropotence. Just put 5 mana into Necropotence here, I think. Or 5 life, I should say. So we'll just have to hope that there's something for us to do during the next turn cycle with this mana that we're holding up. Okay, managing to get into some interaction there in Generous Gift, and we can obviously hold up the Vamp Tutor as well, so get rid of a couple of lands, and we have to bear in mind that these things are going to get exiled, so yeah, we can get rid of the Marsh Flats as well. Goblin Assault and the Shrine are triggering during Juri's turn. Another Goblin in Squee Goblin Nabob now. Just hoping the Rakdos player doesn't manage to get into a Skull Clamp. And the Goblin gonna take 2 life or pay 2 mana to swing into the Planeswalker. I think we need to get rid of the Dimir player as soon as possible because it's 3 creature-based decks up against what looks to be a control, wipe the board every 2 turns type of deck, a Super Friends deck, which is Cauldron, sacrificing the Goblin to gain a life and draw a card. Trostani being cast once again. And then casting their second spell, plenty of graveyard hate this game. Scavenging Ooze into play after that, but Mangara will draw us. Actually, yeah, I need to bear that in mind for the Vamp Tutor, because we're not going to draw whatever we tutor for. Thanks to the Necropotence, we'll have to be a turn behind on that, so if we wanted to go for Cabal Coffers or something that we want to use during our turn, then yeah, we'll have to bear the Mangara in mind. drew in 2 root-born defences anyway. Sivitri ticking up again. And there we see Liliana, Dreadhorde General, so yeah, probably worth throwing a generous gift onto that. Probably in response to the minus down so that they don't get to keep the elephant token. So yeah, they go for the tick down on there. Let's point the generous gift over at Liliana. And then we can go root-born defences in order to populate a Mangara here so that we get to keep one. I think that's probably worth doing. Mangara is doing some decent work for us this game. Does mean that we can't go for the Vamp Tutor, but we weren't going to draw into that card anyway. So we'll still have to sacrifice the creatures, but we'll have 3 creatures as opposed to 2. So populate another 2/2 Mangara into play. They're not legendary, of course, thanks to our Ratadrabik trigger from previous. So we lose the other 2 tokens. They still trigger the Crowded Crypt. So that will now have 5 tokens on it, or 5 counters, and makes 5 tokens for 6 mana tap and sacrifice. So probably a good time to get down our commander at this point, which means we can go for our commander and the Elasil Core, or do we definitely want to hold up the Vamp Tutor? I suppose we could go Elasil Core, sacrifice it to the Phyrexian Tower. We don't have the mana to go Elasil Core, sack it to the Phyrexian Tower with our commander in play, unfortunately. Get down the Caves of Koilos. Yeah, maybe just holding on to the Vamp Tutor is the thing to do here. So we'll get out Ratadrabik again and maybe tutor for a decent creature with the Vamp Tutor. Have to make sure to exile it off the top with the Necropotence, which means we'll have to do it this turn. We'll go in sideways towards the commander over here. Sivitri taking a lot of damage for the Dimir player. They're still at 36 over there, down to 2 cards in hand at least. So now during the main we'll go for the Vamp Tutor, lose 2 life again. And which creature do we want? Maybe just something like Lysa is okay. Pulls double duty, it's a lifelinker in the air that can get rid of these planeswalkers, and it puts creatures back in our hand to keep our hand full. So lose 2 life to that, and we'll just put 3 into the Necropotence. So also drawing into a Demonic Tutor, the Ashiok isn't in play anymore, so that should be useful to us. Yahenni Undying Partisan is a really good sack outlet. Squee Goblin Nabob going back into hand. And then it is a Goblin token, the Shrine continuing to get bigger. So Juri back into play once again. And again putting a plus counter on the Burning Rage Shrine. And again the Goblin swinging in over at the Sivitri. The Goblin Assault has done some work this game. Seeing a Darien King of Kjeldor from the Celestia player. Going to make it very difficult swinging over there. They've only got 1 card in hand though. Plussing on the Walker yet again. And there's an Urborg in play over here as well, so multiple means of taking advantage of Cabal Coffers. And we see Machine God's Effigy. That can come down as a copy of any creature until the end of the turn, then it taps for blue mana. And it comes down as a copy of the Mangara. Oh, it's not until the end of turn, it's just... yeah, it's just an artifact, so it's not a creature, it's just the Mangara, so yeah, we want to swing in over there with multiple creatures, which we will, and the Mangara is going to do some work for them. Gaia Eats Sanitarium is going to have us draw, then discard. Yeah, it's between Primeval's Glorious Rebirth and the Living Death there. Living Death can act as a bit of a board wipe, but it also reanimates our opponent's stuff, so I think we'll keep the Primeval's Glorious Rebirth and discard the Living Death. Anything we discard gets exiled to the Necropotence, so have to be careful with that, especially in a Reanimator list. And Squee Goblin Nabob being discarded to that, as well as a Plains over here. Okay, so I'm just wondering what we might want to tutor for here. I want to start swinging in over at that Dimir player, and we can ignore the Planeswalker for now, I think, because we really don't want them recasting this and getting a bunch of loyalty back on it. Although that will swallow up their turn. Yeah, so I think it's time to start making a bunch of mana and doing some decent stuff here. Let's go Demonic Tutor. We're just going to have to play into the Mangara. They're likely going to draw a couple of cards to that Mangara over there. Noteworthy that they do have triple blue mana held up, but only 1 card in hand, so we'll hope that they don't have a counterspell. So pull out the Cabal Coffers and play that straight away. So that makes 9 mana for us. So we can get down at the Lysa Forgotten Archangel, and that draws the Mangara over there a card. Then we'll play ourselves an Elasil Core, and then I think sacrificing the Elasil Core to the Phyrexian Tower is fine. So that triggers Crowded Crypt, We get a copy of it with the Ratadrabik. Lysa will put it back into our hand at the end of the turn. And then there's no real means of haste in this deck, unfortunately, which would have been useful with the Lysa. So I think we're fine sacrificing the Lysa to Morbid Curiosity and then reanimating it with the Unburial Rites straight away. Don't think we're doing much else with Unburial Rites. Might as well try and draw some cards here without dumping a bunch of life into the Necropotence. So once again, triggering the Ratadrabik, and the Elasil Core is going to trigger, and each opponent is going to lose 1 life. We're at the point where we need to start looking at holding up the Crowded Crypt, I think. So we get a 2/2 non-legendary version of the Lysa, and that enters, so it does gain us a life with the Elasil Core. And that draws us 4 cards, gets us into a Mana Crypt. There's a Smothering Tithe as well, is excellent, so throw down the Mana Crypt. And that takes us into Smothering Tithe, so now we're 1 shy of the Unburial Rites. So if the Lysa gets exiled from our graveyard, then yeah, that's just something that we're going to have to make do with, unfortunately. It's well worth having the Smothering Tithe in play. So instead we'll just get down the Yahenni here, I think. And then the land we drew into, we got a Vault of the Archangel to give all of our stuff Lifelink and Death Touch. Drew into Yosei the Morning Star as well. Haven't done too well on drawing into creatures, but we've had a pretty good turn here, I think. So put 2 life into Necropotence, sends us down to 30 again. And then we're going to have to take 4 life to the Planeswalker here. I assume the Goblins and maybe even Juri will swing in at the Planeswalker to deal with that. Yeah, so I'm going to hold back the Yahenni because it might be a really good indestructible blocker. We'll just go in with 4 damage towards the Dimir player. Or 5 damage, I should say. And we'll gain 2 life, as well as lose 4 life. So Mangara, going to trigger again, sends them up to a 3rd card in hand. But that will activate the Smothering Tithe, because they draw a card to that, and we'll have 2 mana held up, which we can do nothing with. Nope, they decided to tap out, so it looks like they don't hold out much hope for drawing into counterspells or anything. They paid for the Smothering Tithe trigger. Like I said, nothing to do with that mana anyway. So Lysa triggers at the end of the turn. We're going to get the Elasil Core back and draw a couple of cards. So drawn into a basic Plains as a Tainted Field as well. Yeah, just in case of a Blood Moon type effect. I don't think anyone's going to play that, but just in case, we'll keep hold of the basic and the Vault of the Archangel, and we'll exile the Tainted Field away. Drew into a Sir Conrad the Grim as well, by the way. Didn't notice, but there is a Thespian Stage over here, so that could copy our Cabal Coffers. Not sure if our opponent knows he can do that to opposing lands or not. Playing out a Pitiless Plunderer, which is a combo piece. And the 2/2 Juri swinging in towards the Sivitri. And they do swing in with multiple creatures, so Mangara going to do some work for them yet again. Mangara may well refill his hand at this point. And now we see a Transmigrant Altar. So both of the Mangaras going to trigger due to it being the 2nd spell. And we draw into an Arid Mesa, we make a treasure to the Smothering Tithe as well. Trostani Celestnia's Voice into play for a 3rd time, I think this is now. And now the Rakdos player scooping out of nowhere, unfortunately. I thought he was having a pretty good game over there. I'm hoping that that doesn't trigger the Trostani to end up scooping on us as well. Alright, a Duplicant being cast by the Dimir player. Something tells me that if at least 2 of us stick this out, then it's going to last quite a while. That should go on the Yahenni, I think, or the Darien. Okay, so we don't have a sack outlet for Yahenni. Unfortunately, it can't sacrifice itself. Yes, it's another creature. So, yeah, I'm not sure if I sacrificed a creature with Phyrexian Tower last game, or last turn. Yeah, maybe should have held that up for the Yahenni if I didn't. Anyway, that gets exiled under the Duplicant. It's going to be a 2/2 at least, so it's not going to be too worrisome to swing in towards that. And then Gaia-Reach Sanitarium being activated once again. So each of our opponents is going to loot, which will trigger the Smothering Tithe. We will discard an Arid Mesa, and we drew into Anointed Procession, which is really good with our commander, of course. This does make tokens, but it's really good with Smothering Tithe as well. Reanimate now, being pointed at our Lysa, so being punished for not going for the Unburial Rites previously. That is the 2nd spell being cast by this player, so they're going to lose 5 life to the Reanimate and draw us a card. That is a Fetid Heath. Never seen Mangara do so much work. It normally does absolutely nothing whenever I play it. So Yosei is going to do some work this next turn, I think. We're going to have to try and deal as much damage over to the Dimir player as possible. Not drawing a card, of course, thanks to the Necropotence. We definitely want the Vault of the Archangel down. I think I'll make use of that here. Gain some life while we can, just in case the Sivitri comes back into play again and ticks up. Want to try and hold up the Crowded Crypt as well if I can, just in case we need that. So Cabal Coffers makes us 10 mana. We'll go for the Anointed Procession first of all. Then we can play Elas El Kor, which triggers the Mangara, so they're going to draw 2 cards to that again this turn. But Smothering Tithe, each Smothering Tithe trigger makes us 2 treasure tokens now. So it might even be worth, I think we might be gaining even more value from this thing than our opponent is. We gain 1 life to the other Elas El Kor, the token version. Then it is Yosei, the Morning Star. Triggers both the Elas El Kors, we gain 2 life. Then we use our sack outlet that we have left and sacrifice the Yosei, the Morning Star, which got exiled immediately for some reason. Am I missing something? Ah, I'm missing the second ability on the Lysa. If a creature an opponent controls would die, exile it instead. Alright, fair enough. I don't play Lysa for that ability and yeah, completely missed that. Alright, so our opponent has slowed us down quite nicely there. We can still put Death Touch and Lifelink on all of our creatures and swing in though, I think. And I suppose we might as well get out Sir Conrad the Grim. We had a floating mana there. We won't see any creatures die thanks to that Lysa, but it's useful to have Sir Conrad the Grim in play, I think. Yeah, so not getting down the Unburial Rites, doing more damage than I thought it did. Allowing our opponent to reanimate the Lysa was absolutely relevant here. Let's swing in at our opponent with the Death Touches. We might be able to get them to trade this out for something. So we'll swing everything in at our opponent, and they will draw again to their Mangara. All our stuff has Vigilance, Death Touch and Lifelink. Okay, and they are throwing that, so deciding to trade away the Lysa for the Ratadrabik, that's fine with me. The Duplicant going in the way of the Elas El Kor, the token version. It's a shame that the Dimir player does get an untap phase here, but regardless, we managed to get rid of the Lysa. Ratadrabik in the exile zone, thanks to the Lysa. We will put it into the command zone. So they only go down to 23, unfortunately. Ratadrabik will be 10 mana now, I think. So that's just enough with the treasures, and hopefully we'll have 6 mana over the next few turns in order to go for the Crowded Crypt if we feel as though we need to. The reanimation in our hand isn't doing much work this game anyway, thanks to all the exile effects. We did go up to 41 life though, so I think we can do, yeah, quite a heavy hit with the Necropotence. I'll go for 6 with Necropotence because I assume there's going to be a land or 2 in there that we can pretty easily discard, so go through to the end step and the Necropotence will trigger. And we are seeing a decent chunk of mana there. We do manage to find Field of the Dead at least, which I dare say is what we play next turn, but yeah, maybe should have gone even more aggressive. The Phyrexian Reclamation, we're just getting into all of our reanimate stuff. Yeah, the aim last turn, of course, was with the Yosei. We could have had 2 of our opponents not have an untap phase, and I dare say that would have been enough to have the Dimir player scoop, because they just decide to scoop there anyway, regardless of that not happening. And with the double triggers from the Yosei, because we would have had 2 tokens come in, thanks to the Anointed Procession, of course, we could have tapped down all the Celestia players' lands. The Dimir players' lands were already tapped down, so would have put them in a really tricky spot there, especially with having Lysa in play. The original Yosei would have come back into our hand at the end of the turn, and pretty much could have done that forever, as obnoxious as it is. There was always a chance that there could have been some removal onto this Lysa though. So, yeah, wouldn't necessarily have been the game, but our opponents decided to scoop anyway. So it's just a 1v1 versus Trostani. Thought of all the players that were going to scoop, it would have been Trostani. They've had the worst game out of all of us here, I think. Anyway, they threw down the Hornet Queen, gained a bunch of life. They get a 4/4 Angel as well. And so now they've got a bunch of Death Touches in the way. Okay, so we obviously don't draw anything this turn. Throw down the Field of the Dead, and that is going to trigger on landfall every time now. We do have a fetch still in play. Noteworthy that the Urborgs have gone thanks to the 2 quitters. So Cabal Coffers nowhere near as good now, which could completely screw us. Luckily we don't have much in hand anyway. We did lose out on treasure tokens as well, thanks to that scoop. So yeah, very game warping stuff. Might as well swing in with some non-token stuff here, and they can chump block and give us copies of these if they want to. The Lysa will give them back to us. We can get them back with the Phyrexian Reclamation and all the other reanimation stuff that we have available to us. Although unfortunately we've got Darien King of Kjeldor to worry about as well, haven't we? So maybe attacking in isn't the most intelligent idea. While our opponent's in top deck mode, it might be worth just trying to hold on for now. Yeah, we won't attack in here thanks to the Darien. We're not going wide on them anytime soon either. The Crowded Crypt could be bigger, and we'll obviously double up the tokens on this, but yeah, our opponent's at 52 at the moment. We're just playing out some support cards now, I think. Sacrifice a Conrad the Grim to the Phyrexian Tower. We'll trigger Crowded Crypt. We've got one Elasel Core left, the original one. And Ratadrabik will obviously make a couple of tokens, and the Lysa will bring the original back to hand. Yeah, could have done some crazy stuff with the Yahenni this game by sacrificing stuff like Sir Conrad the Grim and Yosei, and then replaying it again straight away, sacrificing it again, thanks to having Anointed Procession and our commander in play. But yeah, we've been controlled quite nicely, I think. Let's dump more life into the Necropotence. I might just go 10 life here. And then, seeing as how we're doing nothing else this turn, is it worth just using this Unburial Rites finally on the Sir Conrad the Grim, just so that we've got it in play for next turn? Because we'll only be able to play this next turn as it stands now. We're likely going to have to discard the Unburial Rites anyway, and it'll be better in the bin, so yeah, I'll just do that here. So the other two Sir Conrad the Grims are triggering, as is the Elasel Core. So it's, yeah, time to start chaining off with Sir Conrad, I think, pretty soon. Problem is, it triggers the Darien King of Kjeldor, because Sir Conrad does count as damage. And yeah, they gain life from the Trostani thanks to that, so that kind of cancels that out. You can see why I was worried about this thing. We are drawing way more cards than our opponent though, so we should be able to get around this. Still worth setting up with the Sir Conrad the Grim. And there we are, getting into some decent cards there in God Eternal O Ketra. We've got Austere Command, can get rid of the Darien and the Hornet Queen quite nicely. Toxic Deluge can wipe stuff. Sidisi's a tutor. We've got our own Urborg to switch on the Cabal Coffers again, so we've got all the lands that we'd want in this deck. Another board wipe in the Dam. Tymna and Dark Prophecy are card draw effects. So yeah, looking pretty good here. So Necropotence does allow the things to go into exile. It puts triggers on the stack, as we can see here. It's not a replacement effect, so still triggering Sir Conrad the Grim by throwing some creatures in the bin. Threw away the Tymna, some lands, the Dark Prophecy, and Primeval's Glorious Rebirth. I think we've got enough card draw, and the Primeval's Glorious Rebirth isn't going to do anything this game. So unfortunately, every time a creature is exiled from the bin with Necropotence, it triggers the Sir Conrads again. So really playing into this Darien of our opponents. And that all happened during the end step, so all the life was gained before the beginning of the end step, so does not trigger the Angelic Accord, unfortunately for them. They end up with 8 soldier tokens thanks to the Darien, and deciding to pay into the Smothering Tithe, so yeah, they can afford whatever they're wanting to cast here by the looks of it. Noteworthy that we do have Vault of the Archangel held up if they decide they want to swing. And that is a scion of V2 Ghazi, so when it enters the battlefield you get a 1/1 bird token with flying, and then you populate, so they'll make either a flying insect or another angel, I think. And they will get an angel at the end of the turn here. And it is an angel that they decide to populate, so going up to 60 life. I'm thinking we're just going to have to completely wipe the board next turn. Looks like they're populating another angel with the Trostani. They can do that at instant speed, but I think they just showed us that they don't have anything in hand like a generous gift or anything. And there we are, it is a Radiant Fountain, so gaining 2 life there as well. So we know they've got nothing at this point, and once we wipe the board we should be looking pretty good. So now populating with the Trostani. And looks like they are swinging in, so we'll try and gain a little bit of life here. We do have 1 flyer in play, which we can... Oh, it already has lifelink, so don't suppose there's much point in bothering with the Vault of the Archangel here. We do draw a card from our Mangara, which continues to do great work for us. And speaking of flyers, that is a Kakusho, the Evening Star, so getting into some really good stuff for our commander. So we block 4 and we take 6 here. So with that creature going down, we have our opponent lose a life to the Elas. The 3 Sir Conrads will trigger. You can see how much work Sir Conrad would normally do if it wasn't for the Darien King of Keldor and the Trostani combo. So Crowded Crypt going to get another trigger. So our opponent now on 65 life, no cards in hand, Angelic Accord triggers, and they'll get 4 life from the Trostani thanks to an angel entering. So if it wasn't for all our card draw from the Necropotents, our opponent would be looking pretty good here. I'm going to have to wipe the board and then quickly crack the Crowded Crypt, I think. So we're playing into a board wipe off the top for our opponent, but I do want to see all the zombies come into play from Crowded Crypt, because I doubt we'll ever see a better showing from this thing. And I don't want my opponent to scoop immediately straight after the board wipe, so drop the Urborg to switch the Cabal Coffers back on. Triggers the Field of the Dead, which gains us a couple of life to the Elas, because we do get 2 zombies thanks to our enchantment. Cabal Coffers taps for 12 mana, and we'll just make it the Toxic Deluge for 5 life here. So it takes us down to 18. We're going to see a lot of Sir Conrad triggers here. And Ratadrabik brings back the Sir Conrad and the Elas Ilkor. We get Elas Ilkor triggers as well. Yep, and our opponent does scoop to that straight away, so unfortunately, forgot about all the triggers, so we wouldn't have had time to do this quickly anyway, but Crowded Crypt was going to get us, I don't even know how many zombies we would have got from that thing, but we can see all the Sir Conrad the Grim triggers here, so we might have been pretty close to taking out our opponent anyway. I'm sure someone in the comment section can do the maths on it if they would like to. Yeah, I mean, I am just holding on to the arrow there, and yeah, took a long time to get through the Sir Conrad the Grim triggers, so you can see why I wanted 3 of those in play, and with the Yaheni we would have been able to make even more with the reanimation and Lysa stuff. With Crowded Crypt we would have had 19 counters on this thing, and that doubled is, what is that, 2040, that is 38. So yeah, 38 zombie tokens from that thing. Main downside of this deck being that it's quite reactionary, and we don't have any means of haste. Maybe throwing in an Akroma's Memorial would be okay, or the Crashing Drawbridge, something like that. But I think it was a pretty good showing for us nonetheless. Apologies for the early scoops, but that's Magic Online for you. Hopefully you all enjoyed the revisit to Ratadrabik. I'm Tribalkai. Thank you for watching.